In the fall of 2000, Jonathan Withrow walked into the first class of the year at Middle Tennessee State University and saw the prettiest girl he'd ever laid eyes on.
It was love at first sight. We worked on several projects together, and we just got to know each other that way.
Her name was Deanna Wilson.
It only took him about 2 weeks to profess his love. Took me a little longer, but when he knows what he wants, he sticks with it.
And 2.5 years after we met, we got married.
Although eager to start a family, the couple's priority is getting through school.
We always knew that we wanted to have children. We were doing everything right that we were supposed to do. Go to college, save money, get a house.
But just a year after the wedding, Jonathan develops a severe inflammatory bowel disease that threatens their dream of having children one day.
When Jonathan started getting sick, he was on some pretty heavy medications that are not good for conceiving a child.
It wasn't a good time for us to be trying to have kids with the health issues I was going through, and we just kind of put that part of our life on hold.
It was hard because most of our friends and siblings were busy having babies. Nobody ever wants to admit that they're jealous, but I was.
Over the next 2 years, Jonathan struggles with his disease and eventually undergoes a successful surgery. With his health restored, Jonathan and Deanna are excited to finally be able to think about having a child.
We'd waited so long to have a family. It was our turn.
While things seem to be falling into place, the young couple gets some surprising news. They're going to be parents sooner than expected.
When I found out Deanna was pregnant with Landon, we were just overwhelmed with joy.
There were a lot of things that I wanted to be in my life, but being a mommy was something that I had to do.
The next 9 months fly by, and on November 3rd, 2006, Deanna and Jonathan welcomed their son, Landon, into the world.
When they finally put Landon in my arms, it was so surreal. It was incredible.
I can't explain it. Only somebody that's had a child knows that moment.
But within minutes of giving birth, Deanna notices something strange about her son.
I looked at him, but he didn't look like he was looking at me. He looked like he was looking up.
The doctor really didn't seem alarmed at all by it. It was just something he was going to outgrow.
They would say that it takes time for some children to gain control over their eyes.
Feeling reassured, the Withrows take their son home, and for the next several weeks, all goes according to plan. But just a few days before Landon turns a month old, everything changes.
He woke up and he was vomiting and throwing up everywhere. I'd never seen a baby throw up this much. I was holding him, and he would arch his back and clench his fists and curl his toes under. This episode went on most of the night. Hours of him coming in and out of screams and clenching and stiffening, and me trying to come up with ways to console him. And it felt like it lasted forever.
It was very hard. To see my son like that, I looked at him and thought, something's just not right. Sorry.
We took Landon to his pediatrician the very next morning, and I told the doctor about Landon throwing up. And the doctor looked him over, did the exam. The doctor said that it was reflux and that it was very normal and not to be concerned about it, that he would outgrow it.
The diagnosis comes as a relief to the worried parents. But the very next day, Landon has another fit, and then another, and another.
After this, it didn't stop. There were more episodes, and they were more frequent. And it got to the point where they were happening at least once or a couple of times a day. And that's just the really bad, the stiffening and the arching and the throwing up and the eyes way up. Every day I would think, okay, this is as bad as it gets. The next day would top it. He screamed like he was on fire.
I am a nurse myself, and this was something I'd never seen before. I had no idea what was happening with Landon. I was actually very scared.
I did anything and everything that I could think of. I gave him gas drops. I tried to feed him. I rocked him in every position that I could think of. Nothing was working, nothing.
Not being able to comfort him was pretty hard. You really want to be there for your son.
I got to a point where when he was going through this, I'd just tell him that I was just gonna go through it with him. Because if I couldn't stop it, I would just tell him, I'm here with you and we'll just get through it together.
After 3 weeks of watching Landon suffer, the Withrows are at their wits' end and decide to get a second opinion.
I explained to the doctor what had happened, and I mentioned to the doctor that his eyes during this episode, that they went way up. I said, is this normal? Is a child supposed to look up like this?
But nothing could have prepared Deanna for the doctor's response.
The doctor mentioned autism. My mind just raced with all the possibilities.
Autism is a complex developmental disorder in which individuals experience problems processing sensory input and communicating with others. Most telling to the pediatrician, however, is the fact that autistic children often avoid eye contact.
That was the first time I really felt like, okay, this could be really bad. This could affect everything. This could affect him for the rest of his life.
Although autism ranges in severity and can be treated with behavioral therapy, there is no cure.
Deanna called me one day and she was crying and she said, Mom, she said, I'm afraid that Landon has autism.
This is not fair. This just isn't right.
I said, Deanna, there's no way to determine at this age whether he has anything like that. And I'm pretty sure that that's not what's wrong with Landon.
If it wasn't autism, then I just wanted to know what it was. I felt like something was killing my child.
Deanna and Jonathan Withrow are convinced something is very wrong with their 6-week-old son, Landon. His eyes are fixed upwards, and he has daily episodes of screaming and vomiting. And while his doctor suspects he's autistic, the Withrows are dubious.
I said, I don't think that's autism. Children develop at different rates. I said, just give him a couple more weeks. Maybe he's just a little slow.
But as the weeks drag on, Landon's fits only seem to be intensifying.
His episodes continued to get worse, and he would be in it a little bit longer than he was when he was younger. It was very scary for Deanna and I.
I'd go from wondering, oh my gosh, is he okay? Is he gonna die? Should I take him to the emergency room? And we did this all day, every day.
Making matters worse, the distraught parents soon find themselves faced with an alarming new symptom.
Landon started developing rashes, and they would just show up at different parts on his body.
Landon would break out in a full body rash all over his arms, his legs, across his belly, and I didn't know why he was breaking out in a rash, and he could do it in a matter of seconds. It would come up so quickly, and then it would go away too. So it was bizarre, really bizarre.
Then, just 3 days later, Deanna makes a shocking discovery.
Deanna came to me one day and she told me that sunlight was bothering Landon, and she felt like that was causing the rash. And basically the reason for that was because she was sitting in the rocking chair beside the window and he was fine, and then after she got up, she had noticed that there was a rash on his arm right where the sunlight would have had to been.
I know that Jonathan thought I was crazy, and when I suggested the sun, that just sort of sealed the deal. I was insane, I was crazy, I had lost it. So we did some experimenting, and I actually put Landon in his room for 2 solid days with no exposure to sunlight. We covered his windows, I covered the door with a blanket so no sun was going to be getting in. And we were all just amazed. 2 whole days went by and he had no rash. It was incredible. I couldn't really believe it myself.
While Deanna's figured out how to control the unsettling rashes, Landon's ear-piercing fits don't let up one bit. And just when the Withrows feel like they can't go on another minute, a new development stops them dead in their tracks.
Just totally out of the blue, he looked me straight in the eye and smiled. He looked like a normal child. I almost couldn't even believe that it was happening, but it only lasted for about 30, maybe 60 seconds.
I was really astounded. I thought, well, maybe, he's getting better and going to outgrow this.
I knew that he had the potential to be a normal child. Hope came back into the picture.
Over the next several days, Deanna and Jonathan watched Landon closely, praying he'll lower his eyes again.
It didn't happen again for a good few days, and then he did it again. And it was just as incredible as the first time, and reassuring that, yes, he can do this. And then after that, again, a few days, a short window. Those little windows were like little miracles.
But despite Landon's improved eye contact, his screaming fits continued to escalate.
It was really scary because to me it seemed like he was having some kind of seizure.
We had been trying to find a pediatrician that would listen to us and would do something. I needed a doctor to see what we had been seeing.
Determined to get to the bottom of Landon's bizarre episodes once and for all, Deanna takes her son into the emergency room.
We went in, and when the pediatrician saw him, she was immediately alarmed. Landon started throwing up, and there we went. Full-blown episode. His eyes were so far up, there was no sign of his personality anymore. It wasn't Landon. Landon was trapped in his own body. The doctor took one look at Landon with his little fists all balled up and his toes curled under and his jaw clenched together, and said that we needed to be admitted to the hospital immediately.
Although she's not completely sure, the doctor has a hunch about what's been happening to Landon all along.
The doctor was mostly concerned Landon had epilepsy.
I really felt like maybe he did have epilepsy because to me it always seemed like he was having some type of seizure, and that would make a lot of sense the way it would come and go.
To determine whether Landon is having epileptic seizures, the doctors will need to monitor his brain on an EEG while he's in the throes of an episode.
When I found out that they were going to do the EEG, I was scared.
That was a very hard experience for both of us, just because I think it's such a traumatizing experience for such a young baby. They don't know what exactly is going on.
At this point, I just wanted to know what it was. If they proved that it was epilepsy, then we'd deal with it.
Sure enough, the next day, Landon has a violent episode of screaming and vomiting. But the EEG results leave doctors with more questions than answers.
The EEG didn't really conclude anything, so we were kind of back at square one, and not knowing what's going on again is more frustrating than knowing.
Okay, if it's not epilepsy, what is it? And that was when the parade of doctors began. One by one, they came into the room and said, "I'm sorry, I have no idea what is happening to your child. I've never seen this before."
It was very frustrating for Deanna and Jonathan because they really needed for someone to say, this is what's wrong with Landon.
I was irate. I was so mad that they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything.
So Landon was discharged from the hospital.
We left that hospital and went home. I'd never felt so alone.
Getting discharged from the hospital at that point was pretty tough. Almost like you walked out of there just not knowing what to do or who to go to.
Over the next 3 months, the Withrows do their best to manage Landon's frequent episodes. But they can't help but notice that their son is also failing to hit nearly every one of his developmental milestones.
The older he got, you could just tell he was getting further and further behind.
He couldn't play with toys like typical children could. He couldn't roll over. He didn't crawl. It just took so long for him to do anything. We continued to see a geneticist and a neurologist, but the doctors really didn't have any solid ideas. There was always this little voice in the back of your mind that says, what if he doesn't walk? What if he doesn't run? What if he can never hold a pencil? It was hard to have faith all the time. I was worried if he could go to school like a typical child at all. I worried that he might never get to live his full potential because of his physical limitations.
After seeing so many different doctors, I was fed up. I was just frustrated.
I was angry and determined to find out what was causing Landon to do this.
At the end of her rope, Deanna decides to take matters into her own hands.
She would spend hours upon hours at night trying to find an answer to what was going on.
And just a few weeks into her research, she comes across a website that stops her dead in her tracks.
I stumbled upon the word upgaze, and I found a video of the little boy, and when I saw that kid and his face and his little eyes looking straight up, that was my kid.
I was in bed, and Deanna got me up to look at a video online about a boy named Danny. I thought maybe this could be what was going on with our son.
The doctor who diagnosed the boy in the video is Dr. Harry Chugani of the Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit.
I sent Dr. Chugani an email. He wrote me back.
Dr. Chugani really wanted to see Landon in Detroit.
Next thing I knew, we were sitting in his office.
I gave Landon the usual neurological examination that most pediatric neurologists would do. I examined his eye movements, I examined his muscle strength. My first impression was that this was a condition that I had seen at least one other case. And that was a case of a child called Danny.
Dr. Chugani said, once you have seen it in one child, it's very easy to recognize in another child.
My diagnosis for Landon was a rare condition called paroxysmal tonic upgaze.
Paroxysmal tonic upgaze, or PTU, is an extremely rare neuro-ophthalmological disorder in which the eyes focus upwards involuntarily. In a healthy individual, chloride ions transmit vital information from one part of the brain to another, including the signals that regulate vertical eye movement. But in patients like Landon, doctors speculate the brain loses its ability to control these ions, and the eyes remain fixed in an upward stare.
We don't really know why this happens. This is a very rare disease. There's only been 40 or so patients described.
After Dr. Chugani was able to diagnose him with this condition, we just took a big sigh of relief.
There was a part of me that said, okay, now he's got a diagnosis. How is that going to affect him? What is his life going to be like?
Deanna and Jonathan Withrow have just learned that their 18-month-old son is suffering from paroxysmal tonic upgaze, a rare disorder that causes his eyes to stare up at the ceiling most of the time.
I was so excited to finally know what Landon had after all of this time.
It really made sense. It just fit.
Dr. Chugani now believes that what looked like seizures to some of his doctors were actually byproducts of Landon's PTU.
Landon would tense up. His body would be rigid, and he would have fisting of his hands and curling of his toes. They could be due to frustration as he's trying to break that upward gaze. I don't think this is a specific symptom of PTU.
But given that scientists understand so little about the disorder, Dr. Chugani can only speculate about Landon's other symptoms.
Landon would have episodes of vomiting. I suspect that this might be related to the fact that his eyes were forced upwards, he was struggling with it, and this whole thing might have made him kind of dizzy, and that could explain perhaps the vomiting.
And while he can't say for sure, Dr. Chugani believes Landon's developmental delays may also be linked to the disorder.
In PTU, there's usually a loss of control of the motor movement and speech centers. We don't really know the underlying mechanism.
While the Withrows are completely overwhelmed by the fact that so little is understood about the condition, they can't help but wonder why it took so long for doctors to arrive at a correct diagnosis.
I don't believe that PTU was really overlooked. I think physicians noted the unusual eye movement. I just don't think they were familiar with the rare condition.
Unfortunately, there is currently no cure or treatment for PTU.
There's not really a medication Landon can take that's going to cure the disease.
But Dr. Chugani is hopeful that Landon's eyes will eventually correct themselves.
The symptoms with PTU do tend to improve with age. At least the eye movement abnormalities tend to improve. Most of the cases that have been described show that there is improvement of their symptoms by the time they're 4 or 5 years of age.
Today, Landon's almost 3, and his eyes are already improving. He's able to control his gaze for even longer periods of time, and consequently has made a number of developmental strides.
Every day, Landon does something new, and we can see him coming out of it, and we can see it going away. And it's awesome. It's phenomenal.
We are all really thrilled with where he is right now.
Unfortunately, Landon's PTU continues to give rise to both physical and mental delays.
Landon doesn't speak yet. He makes babbling sounds, but there really isn't speech. So he's quite delayed at age 3.
He's been army crawling for probably 6 or 8 months at least now, if not longer. As far as walking, he's still not able to do that.
To help him get around better, Landon has recently learned how to use a wheelchair.
He did really well with it. It's his little go-kart, and it's nice because mentally, emotionally, Landon is a very typical toddler, and toddlers like to move. I hope that one day Landon has no physical limitation. I know that he is a very smart little kid, and I just want him to be able to reach his full potential.
I feel like he'll be able to one day go to school, be able to hang out with his friends, play some sports. But overall, my main goal is just to see him be just like any other normal child.